Good morning. Today I'm going to talk about the generosity of God. And I'm using as my theme verse 1 Samuel chapter 30, verse 24. I'm going to just talk about the background to this verse. This is in the context of a chapter 30, in the life of David, just before the death of Saul and David being declared king. He had been hiding from Saul trying to kill him, King Saul, and David avoiding that, and David never lifting a finger or a hand against Saul, honouring Saul as the Lord's anointed. And David spent much of his time in the Philistine territory to keep away from Saul. And he was given a town called Ziklag to live in, and he and his men, some 600 men there were, I think, they lived in Ziklag with their families and were quite settled there. And the chapter 30 opens with David and his men arriving home after 3 days of travelling, walking home. They were tired, they were ready for home, and as they came over the hill, they saw that Ziklag had been burned, and the Amalekites had attacked Ziklag, taken away all the women and children, and destroyed the town with fire. And the men that were with David, they wept. It says in verse 4, they wept until they had no more strength to weep. They were exhausted and very emotionally distressed. They had no hope, really, for their families. Their women and children had been taken away, and everything they owned had been burned. And David seeks the Lord and decides to pursue the Amalekites. And he goes with 600 men, it says in verse 9. And when they came to the brook Bezor, 200 stayed behind, looking after everything they could leave behind so that they could travel faster with less gear on them, so that they could pursue this band that had taken the wives and children as quickly as possible. And 200 were left with the baggage. Anyway, the pursuit happens, and David and the 400 that go with him defeat the Amalekites, retrieve everything, retrieve the women and children and the spoil that was taken away from them, and take lots of stuff from the Amalekites whom they had defeated. And it says in verse 18, David recovered all that the Amalekites had taken, and David rescued his 2 wives. Nothing was missing, whether small or great, sons or daughters, spoil or anything that had been taken. David brought it all back. He also captured all the flocks and herds, and the people drove the cattle before him and said, "This is David's spoil." So a wonderful victory. David retrieved everything, and then he began to go back to Ziklag with everything. And then they came eventually to the 200 men that had waited behind halfway because they'd been too exhausted to go. And the ones that had gone with him did not want to share the spoils of the battle with the ones that hadn't been involved in the battle. Now you might think that's a reasonable thing. Why should they share if they were not in the battle? They were only not in the battle because they were absolutely wiped out by the march home and by the distress of losing everything, and the initial march in haste, of course, chasing after the Amalekites until they could do it no more. And David says to them in verse 23, "You shall not do so, my brothers, with what the Lord has given us." David sees the Lord as the one who gave the victory, and he says, "Well, the Lord has given us all this spoil. We shan't do that. We shan't keep it." They had said, we won't share it except to give every man back his wife and children. And David says, no, you shall not do that with what the Lord has given us. He has preserved us and given into our hand the band that came against us. Who would listen to you in this matter? For as his share is who goes down into battle, so shall his share be who stays by the baggage. They shall share alike. And this is a wonderful principle that I think we can take on board, whatever our role in the Lord's army is, as we fight battles and as we gain victories for the Lord. There's an important aspect that as we gain victories for the Lord, as we do wonderful exploits for the Lord, those who are behind with the baggage share in that as those who are frontline troops. Now, you might not be following where I am, but think about yourself. Perhaps you're somebody like me who has never gone abroad to serve the Lord, but you support perhaps somebody who has gone. I support Mission Aviation Fellowship. You might support Release International, or water provision, whatever it is, and you support them and you give money to them and you pray for them, but you haven't gone. Now, the benefits, the blessings, what is done by that person will be shared with those who have supported back home. We can't all go on the mission field. We can't all be the leaders, but we can pray for them and for the people that they minister to. And we share in the victory just as much as they do. Because you see, it's not the important thing is not what you do. It's whether you do what the Lord has asked you to do. If the Lord has called you to pray and support, and you throw that to one side and put all your efforts into going abroad, the blessing won't be yours. We need to be doing what the Lord has asked us to do. If he's called you to prayer and support and to being a good neighbour and to a simple life, not going abroad, not teaching a Sunday school class, no, but you're the prayer, you will share in the spoils just as much as the one who's on the front line. The important thing for all of us is to know, as David knew, whether the Lord wanted him to pursue that band or not. We need to know what the Lord wants us to do and to do it wholeheartedly. And all who are in the kingdom will share the same spoil. This was a law that David made in Israel from that day onwards, and it was observed down through the centuries, that all share in the plunder. We know, Gideon's 300 that went with him shared with everyone else the gains from the victory that he had. That's my thought for the day. God bless you. Have a great day. See you tomorrow. Bye-bye.